Welcome, everyone. My name is Reverend Janet Nohavec. I'm coming to you from the Journey Within Spiritualist Church in Pompton Lakes, New Jersey. I am the pastor of the Journey Within, a former Roman Catholic nun. I am a tutor at the prestigious Arthur Findlay College. And we wanted to come to you today on Facebook Live, just really to talk about what's happening on the planet at the minute. As all of you are navigating with us, it's a challenging time. Um, there certainly are things we'd like to speak and share with you about. Joining me today is Reverend Dr. Jane Selinske. She's an ordained minister with the Journey Within. She's a licensed Jungian psychologist, a licensed clinical social worker. She's a board certified music therapist, a Reiki master, and is on the faculty of the C.J. Young Institute of New York. Her work now has her involved with hospital and hospice patients, and that's really brought her really much closer to working with her healing ministry. Welcome, Dr. Jane Selinske.
Thank you, Janet.
Thank you. Also joining me today is Lorna Hines. She is a medium, a trance healer. She's an intuitive coach, a psychotherapist. She's an inspirational speaker, teacher, and an author. She is well known in our area, I have to say. During her career spanning more than 40 years, she's functioned as a psychotherapist, a researcher, a trainer, administrator, university professor, and a CEO. She's developed significant expertise in cultural competence, trauma, sexual and physical abuse, and presented scientific papers both nationally and internationally. She has quite an extensive, as do both ladies, I have to say, career path, and as well as a working medium. So you can find out more about Lorna at www.lornajhines@gmail.com. In her spare time, she supports an orphanage in Ghana, northern Ghana, where disabled children receive care. Um, Both Lorna and her team of helpers were featured on the WNBC television show Debrief in the fall of 2014. So we welcome to our platform as well, Lorna. So she as well is in the ministerial program of the Journey Within. And we welcome you to our platform as well. Thank you, Lorna. Welcome. So as we come together today, focusing kind of on living in the solution, people have been asking, where's the spiritualist voice during these times? Spiritualists have been activists from the beginning of the movement. They were very much informed with Reformation on many different levels, women's suffragettes movement, human dignity on all levels, and that continues to be true today. Our principles in themselves have us working for humanity and equality around the planet. If you are sharing our planet at the minute, of course, we've been living through the pandemic and recent months, the tragic passing of George Floyd. So spiritualism definitely proclaims a zero tolerance toward all forms of racism, acts of violence, abuses of power, zero tolerance, and our hearts go out to the victims. That we have to acknowledge there is a systemic abuse of the African American population, and look at the causes of racism. We've got to stop, we've got to listen. And I speak to myself, I think it's really for all of us here present, for all of you joining, I think it's really a time of self-examination, where we individually stand, learn more, look at our own biases that are there, look at what we've been brought up with. It's significant, and see how we can build bridges in this, support education and employment opportunities for the African American population. Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, but what we've seen visible on the television has been distressful, really distressful. But it has brought something to the light that hopefully some good will come from all of this, I have to say, if we act on behalf. We can vote. We can vote for change. We can volunteer. We can support better minimum wage and fairness. We can have zero tolerance of racial disparity in the judicial system. we certainly have a lot of more progress that is really needed at this time. Um, Being part of COVID itself, I have to say, before the events that have been unfolding as well before us, has been, a challenge for all of us as well. And I think everybody on the planet is grieving at the minute in a different way. Whether you are grieving because of what you're watching on TV, where we are actually watching murder on TV of living people, in particularly George Floyd's case, whether we're watching abuses of power right in front of us, um, whether we're watching thousands of coffins go in front of us because of COVID and the losses. This is extreme conditions on the planet, and we are grieving on a lot of different levels, I have to say. So please be really mindful of children at this time. We're adults and we're having a tough time coping. You know, the children, particularly, I have to say, need outlets and more resources, and need us, particularly during these difficult, challenging times. So I'm hoping this chaos will bring change, and a spiritual awakening. I do believe there is a spiritual awakening happening on the planet. Um, and I can suggest only for you, and I know that's true of the panelists that are here for me with me today, that if you live a life of purpose, we can live in a comfortability within our own skins, in a way where when we examine our conscience, I have to say, hopefully we continue to grow every day we're on the planet. But for those of us who are really wanting to support the change, acknowledging there is a problem, trying to comfort people during a very difficult time on the planet, and having a social conscience in all of this. It really is very important. Our second principle in spiritualism asks us to work on behalf of all of our brothers and sisters on the planet for a better humanity. So as we continue today's discussion, please be safe. We're going to get into a little bit of self-care as we talk about this today, and ways to care for ourselves during this stressful times. So use your voice, listen, grow, cultivate integrity and character. It's really very important. So as we just come together, as we continue with this, if you just join me for a moment in prayer. Great Spirit, loving God, as we come together collectively here today, may we hear your voice and direction in our individual lives, for we know you to represent that quality and the best of the potential of this human family on this earth at this time. Help us to not turn a blind eye to what is happening. Let us name injustice anywhere and everywhere. Give us the fortitude and the courage to help those who are in need of help right now around our planet on such different levels. We have grieving families from people who've lost people from the COVID epidemic. We have children that are struggling, not enough food. 1 in 17 adults, seniors don't have enough food at the minute in our country. 1 of 7 children do not have enough food at the moment. And in places like Africa, in places where regions are difficult, there are 6,000 children dying a day. Help you and I here make a difference. We can certainly live a life of usefulness. And we ask you, dear God, to guide our footsteps. May we individually and collectively make a difference as we walk through this planet. Amen. Amen. I'd like to introduce Lorna in next for your thoughts and views. And thank you for sharing this platform today, Lorna.
I first want to acknowledge Reverend Janet and my co-presenter. Janet has always been a leader, and she has not shied away from leadership regarding this current issue that's affecting our nation and many nations. So I applaud and support her taking the steps that are necessary to address these very, very important issues and challenges. and to be forthright and to be guided by the principles of spiritualism, as I am. And I will tell you, during these very difficult times, these very challenging times, I have relied on the first principle, trying to imbue myself even more with that wonderful creative spirit, that wonderful Father God that we know and trust, and believe that there is a road, there is a path towards that spirit, both within and without us, that we can grab onto during these very difficult times. Janet mentioned the brotherhood of man, and absolutely, that's essential, that we see ourselves as part of a wonderful human community. But there is also an opportunity for us as spiritualists to consider the last principle. And it's wonderful in the intelligence of spirit that these principles intertwine with one another. And in many ways, the last, in some ways, can be the first, because it reminds us that we can make progress, that we can initiate and sustain progress within ourselves, that it's open to every human soul, to all of us, including those that do things that are detrimental to other human beings. So I know it's important that we rely on our principles. I'd like to speak, though, more in a focused way, ways in which we as spiritualists can confront some of these issues, both in terms of being an individual, being part of a community, and even larger in groups and even larger forums. And I'd like you all to consider 3 T's that I have to thank my daughter for giving me. So this is something that perhaps you will remember after this broadcast. And the first one is called tools, Tools, tools. And what I would suggest in terms of tools for us is to begin to have an understanding of how we got to where we are. This situation that we find ourselves in as a nation is not just related to the unfortunate demise of the last 3 people, Mr. Floyd, Mr. Ahmaud, and also Breonna Taylor. There's a history to that, a long history. And I challenge myself today, prior to our program, to just write down some of the names of people I personally knew about that were unfortunately killed by the police. And I came up with 10 names beginning in 1990. And for those of you that live in New Jersey, you may not know in 1990, we had the untimely killing of a 16-year-old young man who was not armed by the police, named Philip Pennell. So we have a whole number of people that have gone through this type of thing. So I would say that in terms of tools, let us look at the history. Let us look at what is some of the experiences of African Americans in terms of racism. And by the way, Janet made a very good point. We should not begin to struggle with, am I racist? Am I not racist? Because I think that kind of binary, that kind of trying to see where we fit in, or trying to understand some of our behaviors and ideas that do not necessarily fit in what we think of as racism. We need to begin to develop tools to understand that this issue of racism, it has a long continuum. And so I would say tools are very, very important. As I mentioned, we have the history in terms of the numbers of people, both men and women, that have been killed, unfortunately, through the hands of police. But besides that, there is not a part of institutions here in the United States that I can name where there is not disparities. Whether I'm talking about health, whether I'm talking about education, whether I'm talking about our criminal justice system, which uh, uh, Janet highlighted. You know, we have 13% or so of African Americans in our nation, but somehow we ended up with 50% of African American in jails. That had a lot to do with, as you know, that whole so-called war on drugs, which in many ways led to the unfortunate incarceration of many African American, especially men. We have difficulties, tremendous difficulties in our educational system, and we have lack of equity in our educational systems. We also have problems around employment and the extent to which where many African Americans are not hired for jobs, even though they have similar or the same credentials for various jobs. We have a problem around financial insecurity and home ownership, tremendous disparities among African Americans. And I know we concentrated on health in terms of the COVID, and we know currently 23% of the reported deaths of people who have COVID are African American. And again, we try to understand, how is it with 13% of the population, but yet we are 23% of the deaths, and we don't even know how many are affected. So tools are essential, and we can obtain tools individually, we can do it in groups, or we can do it in a wider scale. The second suggestion I would have is to devoting some time. This is the second T, T-I-M-E, devoting some time for the inner self-work that I think it would be very helpful for many of us to explore. Because I think that we live our lives and we may be inundated with different information, but oftentimes we don't necessarily put it all together. We don't put together all of this experience of African Americans that I am talking about. And so as we develop this self-knowledge, hopefully it will help us to begin to inculcate and bring together in our mind these various disparities and the reasons why we have, this is the 10th day of horrific anger among people. And as you can see, it is a multicultural and diverse, so that we have people that are white that are just as enraged with some of these circumstances. So as we begin to tune inward, hopefully our tuning in and our understanding our own consciousness will help us to radiate outward. And that time in silence will help us do some inner work. And last but not least, I would suggest the third T that you consider is your talent. Because all of us possess wondrous heavenly gifts. It's part of the legacy of having a wonderful Father God, this wondrous spirit. And these gifts, even you might say, are very small in comparison to the enormous problems that we are facing, but you can contribute, whether it is your healing practice, where is perhaps you want to diversify your practice and invite more people of color into your practice of mediumship or healing or whatever. Maybe you need to put in an ad, or maybe you need to talk to some of your colleagues that are mediums of color. And how will I engage these groups? How will I help? Because I think we need to move from tooling up and having some time to inner reflection to moving forward with an action plan. And I do feel within my heart, if we can move forward, whether it's individually, groups, or even larger places, if we can move forward, each taking responsibility, each taking individual ownership of how we're going to rectify the problem. Voting is important, all that other stuff is important, but this isn't a political discussion, is it, ladies and gentlemen? We're talking about spiritualism and what spiritualists can do. And so we want to take it forward and see what we can do so that there is a global statement from those of us that call ourselves spiritualists, a global statement that says we have a history of activism. We have a history of engaging people multiculturally, class, ethnicity, whatever you are. This is our part of our credo, and we can definitely move forward. We can definitely tackle these disparities, this hurt, this pain, because we know that we have the potential to grab onto the right stuff and make it happen. So won't you join us? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lorna, for those inspiring words. As we are navigating challenging times on the planet, we wanted to bring in Dr. Jane Selinske to talk about coping on the planet at the moment. So thank you, Jane, for being with us.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity. And thank you, Lorna, also for those inspiring words that basically touch one's heart as I heard them. Now, to talk today a little bit about self-care has a lot to do with coping. And when we look at what self-care is, it's an important thing to maintain our own health and our own healthy relationship with ourselves. Because if we don't have a healthy relationship with ourselves, we're not going to be able to produce the positive endorphins that come within our own self and to inspire and to help our own immune system. So when we are able to produce a healthy, important relationship with ourselves, we have a better sense of how to be healthy and how to care for ourselves. Now, I've listened, my favorite station is NBC, and there's often somebody that comes and speaks, and his name is Dr. Sean McMillan. Dr. Sean McMillan was on the other day, and he mentioned that he feels that we are in a place of a newborn baby being born. And when I heard that, I thought that that was such a good symbolic way to hold on to what's going on at this point in time. And he mentioned in terms of the birth, that we're basically in the birth canal. And I think as we saw the beginnings of the marches and the rioting, that there was a lot of fear, that there was a lot of concern about what was happening. But as time went on, we could see how much more of a birth was taking place. And the birth that was taking place, according to him, and I would agree with him because it really stuck with me, was that sense of a birth of freedom, a birth of justice, and a birth of equality for all, which is part of our own spiritualist belief system of bringing forth a better world. Now, when you have something that really catches on to your soul and it nurtures you, it brings you a lot of joy. It's something that you should hold on to. And it's easy to forget that. We've been in our houses for almost 3 months, and we might not have been able to hold on to the thing that really gives us that tremendous joy. But if you can find whatever it is that really gives you joy and contentment and something that you can spend time in and not think about the time going by, make room for it. You know, if you make room for it, you're nurturing yourself, you're giving yourself that better sense of salve, so to speak. So it's really also important, in addition to having time for yourself to find that thing that really does bring yourself joy, to really take time for reflection. Okay, at the root and at the heart of all this is to be able to reflect and to find what is important to you so that you really can move forward and take action for yourself and for others. We don't want to be taking action without reflection, without that contemplative spirit, without thinking about it, without reflecting, without praying, but to hold on to those things and then to take action. It's only through the reflection that we're really going to be able to tap into the authentic self of ourselves that we can bring forth into the world. If we bring ourselves into that individuated place, we can then affect what needs to happen in the rest of the world. Now, are we having peace in all this? Maybe not. There's an awful lot of chaos. There's an awful lot of chaotic things that are happening in our world at this point in time. But to really try to experience that peace, it takes grooming. It takes practice. It comes out of that reflective place. And we can only tap into that peace if we can tap into the quiet. In the midst of the chaos and the hectic life that we all live, and now becoming more hectic in terms of what's happening in society, you need to be able to go into that quiet place. I can't stress that enough, to make a place for that silence. You don't know what can come out of the silence. New things can be birthed. And out of that birthing, we need to nurture the silence. Because if you don't, there'll be burnout. And the Dalai Lama has said, which is something that's very, common to us all. But if you feel burnt out, the only way that you can help yourself so that you can help others is actually to withdraw and restore yourself. So we may have had the experience of being in our homes for so long. We might be with our children. Things might have been happening with them. We've been trying to be teachers. We've been trying to be parents. We've been trying to be wives and husbands. And it was certainly not the usual. For some, you could see on the television, there was a lot of, let's say, newness that came out of that for some families. And I think that that's true also for many. But there's also what might have happened behind closed doors, which might have caused anxiety and stress and depression and more of the burnout. So if there has been the burnout, what you need to do is to do self-caring activities for yourself. What's going on today in our society is that anger has really reached a tipping point. And people are projecting. It's a key word, projecting. We project onto others things that we haven't taken care of in ourselves. So we can project the anger outward. So what do we need to do to remedy that? These are lifelong lessons, but we can begin if you haven't already. How to remedy the projection onto anybody is that we need to be attentive to what we feel at the moment. I can't stress that enough. To pay attention to what we feel at the moment. And if we can be attentive to what we feel at the moment, we then maybe can learn to say it at that point in time and not hold on to it. We can see in this whole situation of racism how holding on to this for generation and generation and generation has reached another boiling tipping point. Not that it's the first, but it has reached another tipping point. So let me encourage you to please speak about your feelings. I know somebody that is extremely sensitive, and she can say, okay, I need to clean my house. And if I just say to her, I agree with you, she can be upset about that. So we have to learn also how to say things and how not to say things, and who we can say things to, but also to pick the people that we feel most comfortable with, that we can share what's deepest within us. And practicing this whole situation of knowing what our feelings are doesn't come easy. One of the things I can recommend is walking when we can. We can't walk down the street now, but when you walk down the street and you see somebody and the person is walking a dog, you ask yourself, how do I feel about that dog? That dog might be the best dog you've ever seen. It might be the scariest dog you've ever seen, but it gets you to practice how you're feeling about certain things. The other thing, in addition to speaking, some people don't like this, but there is the potential for journaling, to write things down. You don't have to write long, big paragraphs. If you just jot down a feeling, a memory, so that you can release it. The whole idea is to actually release it. And to try not to let somebody's anger trigger you. Now, that sounds easy, but forget it. It's not. It's easier said than done, because what happens is when we are up against somebody that is projecting an angry comment or statement to us, it triggers inside of us that feeling of anger ourselves. And if we don't be attentive to that at the moment, we could easily wind up into a whole array of fighting back and forth, or words back and forth. So again, it's paying attention to what it is that you actually feel when somebody's putting that anger at you. Try to hold on to the feeling and deal with it somewhere else. Now, the watching of the news can either numb us or can ignite us. So one recommendation is maybe not to spend as much time on the news, but to be attentive to what your reaction is, so that the reaction, again, doesn't get projected onto somebody else. Now, there are certain things, and some of these that I'm going to say to you are very well-known, common activities that can help us when we are trying to cope and when we are trying to take care of ourselves. The first one is exercise. Now, everybody's probably groaning and moaning about this. I had gotten myself into a routine of exercising. I'd get up and I'd get out and I'd start walking. And I felt very good about myself. But what happened was activities came into my life and I needed to finish certain things. And what happened, first thing that goes, was my exercising. But what happened is that, one, I lost the motivation that it gave me. And that's something that happens within the chemical release and the release of stress, which exercising gives us. It also, as you know, relaxes and it builds up our immune system. So the building up of the immune system through the exercising is critical. All right. I mentioned to you before about the silence and reflection that nurtures what comes out of your soul, so that you can listen to what's coming out of your soul, so that you then can bring that into some action that's informed out of your prayer and your meditation, which is another activity. So to let it come out of the silence, out of the prayer, and out of the meditation, so that you are assured of what your action is going to be. And you can trust it and believe in it. Another very, very important piece is sleep. Okay? We can lose sleep, and you've, I'm sure, heard this, but sleep, we don't get enough sleep. It breaks up our whole cycle. Okay, we're not dreaming as much. When we're not dreaming as much, we're not releasing. Our brains are not being, as they say, they sweep during the middle of the night, so they're not getting swept as thoroughly. And if you're breaking up your sleep in between with television or with phones, it is something that is tremendously detrimental. So exercise and sleep, the silence, the reflection, the prayer, meditation. Also, the eating right. The easiest thing to do is to go and pick on some comfort food. We all do it. Okay. And if you are ever, and I'm sure you do see some of the emails that come through with the jokes that are going around. And one of them is, I've got my mask on really because I don't want to go into the refrigerator, not to keep me protected from the virus. It's basically to keep me out of the refrigerator. So there's lots of things for us to kind of tap into with laughter, which is another. If you can watch, some movies that will get you laughing and releasing, again, those endorphins, you're able to give yourself and the world a much, much better place. Another thing that helps is the scent and the smell. So if there's a favorite smell that you have, mine happens to be pine. I absolutely love the sense of pine. If I smell pine, I can go right into a zone of my own that relaxes me tremendously. If you have a pet, to cuddle with your dog or your dog or your cat, or some of you might have some more exotic animals, but to try to get the joy and the cuddling from them. And then another thing that can be so helpful is to be able to speak to your family and to your friends about what's happening. Again, on NBC, they were having a conversation the other day with 3 Black speakers, and there was one Caucasian woman. And what she was saying was basically she was afraid to speak. And they had a wonderful conversation about the fact that she was the only Caucasian woman amongst 3 African American people, and that she felt frightened and scared to speak. But because they enabled her to speak, she was able to open up and to say more. So to encourage and to try to begin conversations about racism and not be afraid. I know it's not easy not to be afraid, but try not to let the fear silence you, but to open the conversations. The anxiety and depression, the anxiety can be helped by mantras. I think of it as putting in a tape inside your head. Think of the old tape recorders where you put in the tape. At this point, you take out the old tape that might be, I'm afraid to go down the street, or I'm afraid to open my mouth, and put in a new mantra that says, I'm free, I'm alive, or something that is significant to you, and say it over and over and over again so that you can release that anxiety situation that you might be so fearful of. I am safe. To keep repeating that. Take out the tape that you have in your mind, put in the new tape. I am safe. The anger can easily morph into violence. So be mindful of that. And the depression that you might feel is really out of anger turned inward. So the idea about anger is to get it out through writing, through journaling, through speaking about it, so that you have a control on your anger and it is not controlling you. Janet mentioned about the children. Important to bring the children into the conversation, to bring them into what's happening, not to wait until they're 15 years old to bring up the topic. A situation that I had when I got a new puppy, this was many years ago, and I was running a camp for handicapped children, and the children were severely handicapped, and they were actually acting out and rocking and speaking out. And I had this new puppy. The new puppy was probably barely 8 to 10 weeks old. And this puppy looked at the situation that was going on around the pool, and the puppy walked away. So we all know that there are differences. Even at that 8-week-old time frame, this puppy knew that there are differences. But we need to embrace the differences, and not be fearful. So to bring the children into the conversation, to let them know that you could imagine what they're feeling, to help them feel safe, and to try to use creative ways of helping them express, to help them express their feelings through drawing, through making little stories up, by doing plays within the family, but to help them actually create something that will free them up. Now, I've spoken a lot about the different things that you can do, but one of the things that stood out to me was I was watching something about Oprah Winfrey, and Oprah was giving a talk about her school and her girls and her daughters, as she calls them. And she was talking to Maya Angelou, and she was talking to her about what her legacy might be. And she was thinking, well, it might be the school, it might be what she's done with the girls. And Maya Angelou said to her, your legacy is everyone you touch. Your legacy is everyone you touch. So I invite you to speak up and speak out from your soul's place and touch with empathy and compassion and have a future legacy of heart that comes from your soul. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you, Jane, so much.
You're
During these
welcome.
times, we are a spiritualist church. There are times in our lives where we need to ask for help. We do have ministers available here at the Journey Within. Sometimes you just need someone to talk to. And that is the purpose, within our spiritualist movement, to be of assistance to each other. So it's significant. Be honest with yourself. Just like the other ladies, I have to be honest with myself, the whole Zoom world a couple of weeks ago, after 70 days of Zoom, I was at a point I knew if I didn't get away for a couple of days, I was not going to be a nice human being. I knew I hit a wall, and I knew, and I did. I took myself away for a couple of days and shut it all off. So we have to be mindful of where we are, and that's part of our spiritual truth as spiritualists. Know thyself, I have to say. Be comfortable and at peace with yourself in the quiet. And that's the work we have to do, the inside work that we spoke about. There are serious issues on our planet. We cannot deny the injustice that we have seen. But without creating a dialogue, we're just sitting and kind of mulling it over ourselves. And I really have found through these days, or the groups or the services, the healing services, just staying in community is really, we need each other. I always look at it kind of as a tree. And if it's a big, beautiful tree and half of the tree is suffering and diseased and not well, it's going to affect the other half of the tree. We're all connected on this planet, we can't have this disparity, so individually, it's your personal choice. It's your personal responsibility, as one of our principals talked about. But it's very significant that you and I can really examine our conscience, work on our character and integrity, and work for the humanity that we know as spiritualists is possible on this planet. So beautiful accompanying words for both of my guests. Do you have a closing word or two you'd like to say, Lorna? Whoops, just 1 minute, Lorna. You've got to mute. Okay, go ahead.
Yes. I think I said it all, I think, in terms of my time, my tools, and my talent. But I do suggest for those of us that are not African American spiritualists, that we do take time to examine how we got to this point and what are the important things, the important lived experiences of African Americans in our country that have brought many to the point of feeling so angry, so enraged, so frustrated. I think Mr. Taylor, Miss Taylor, Mr. Ahmad, and Mr. Floyd. Yes, those are, in my words, martyrs who died for a cause. But there is so much more to the story and the history of the African diaspora. So if we don't understand the facts, if we don't understand the history, if we don't understand what is making many African Americans so upset, we don't have an opportunity to figure out what needs changing. And we can be changed agents. If you don't feel empowered, let me tell you, you have the power of the inner spirit within you. You were born with that. So take charge of that power. Make something important happen. From prayer to activism. Activism in a positive, peaceful way, but make it happen. And I join you, I support you, and I'm also available, if needed, to talk more about this subject.
Thank you, Lorna. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jane. Do you have a closing word?
I would say to go in, to come out, and to produce whatever that is that you're called to be about. And let your soul speak to you. Let God speak to you. And bring whatever it is that you can into the world for a better world and for change. Amen.
Thank you, ladies. From my heart, may we just close in prayer. Great Spirit, Mother, Father, God, as we come to you on this beautifully glorious planet you created for us to experience, from the majesty of the stars to the beautiful trees, to the gorgeousness of all the colors of the flowers. We, as humans, even greater to you, are an aspect of droplets of God. May we live a path of service. May you find something you're passionate about. And may you truly, truly, from within yourself, focus on the development of a spiritual life. We live in a material world, but to awaken the spiritual life will help us to navigate with our hand connected to a God of your understanding and to a heart that is of service. May we all be part of the change for good. Thank you for being with us today. I'd like to thank our guests, Reverend Lorna and Jane Selinske. So if you'd like to contact Lorna, would you like to just say your web contact again, dear?
Sure. www.lornajhines.com or lornajhines@gmail.com.
Thank you. If you need to contact the Journey Within, it's the www.journeywithin.org. You can reach me as well. If you'd like to forward something to Jane, you could do it via us. We'd be happy to pass that along. Thank you for taking the time for joining us. Without dialogue, there really is no way forward. So let us look directly at what is happening. Let us support each other as we move on. And blessings on your day. Thank you so much, ladies, for taking the time today.
Thank you.
You're most welcome.